So I'm just going to go through these Genesis reveals from Clan Collection Volume 3. I just read them this morning. I kind of went ahead of myself, no reaction video this time around. But basically, to start with Apple Cider, it's a witch, so very good if you're playing a witch deck. Good with like fixes because it can be searched via fixes, or it can be good also with the witch critical trigger because if you ride this, you can use the crit trigger, return to your deck, draw a card, check top 3, 1 to soul, 2 to drop. Quite handy. The other thing is, it's also handy, is that at the end of battle, it boosted, you can soul charge 1 and return to your hand, or soul charge 2. So it's kind of like a Stray of the Four Heavens, except instead of Soul Blast 2, you can soul charge 1. So it's a bit more of a plus to your soul rather than negative soul. The negative soul obviously used to be good back when Taro was around, but it got banned, so Astray is nowhere near as good as it used to be. But Apple Witch Cider, it's very handy, the whole bounce to hand thing. In Witches actually, because Witches do have the superior core multi-attack combos with Clove or Snake Witch Mint, so you can bounce this back to hand before you end up calling Melissa, or old school Melissa or Onion over your booster, so it can be handy for that. But another thing as well, it's kind of like the Regalia grade one from Clan Selection, VAR. So VAR was basically like you put an equip gauge onto it, and then in the following turn you'd then be attempting to de-equip the gauge to Soul Charge 3. It was a bit slower, and technically you are getting the same amount of soul, because the Soul Charge 3, you're losing a card from soul anyway to get the equip gauge to meet the cost, so you're basically getting the same quantity of soul, except you are digging the deck one card deep with VAR. But the thing is, this card is faster because you're doing it instantly as soon as you drop on the board, whereas VAR had to usually wait an extra turn, unless you had like Norn, but that's like a grade 2, whereas this now gives you the potential to actually do it from turn 1. You're always just instantly having the soul. So it's kind of better than VAR for that reason in a way. And obviously, like, you can't really make use of the counter charge because you need Regalia Vanguard. But yeah, it's pretty good. It's kind of nice that you can stick it on the board early and then keep it out there, and then once you feel ready to have it as your defense card, because now you're thinking, okay, my opponent's now going to go a bit harder on me, then comes the time that you add it to your hand when you need it. So you can potentially build quite a bit of soul with it. Very good card when you compare it to like other soul charges we've had in the past. The next bit is basically like when it's placed on guard, you can put a card from your hand to soul, so it's like a discard one but with the flavour of soul charging, kind of just like the old Cider actually, because they used to guard and soul charge at the same time. So it gets 5k shield for every 3 cards in your soul, so that's kind of a bit of a weird one because sometimes you have soul, sometimes you don't. It really depends on how the turn goes. Because obviously, like Genesis, sometimes you do whiff your costs. Like you may try to aim for some big play, like Amaruda Soul Blast 15, and you think to yourself, actually it's not worth it, or actually I'm like 1 card in my soul short, or there's usually some sort of excuse you might find. But or not even just Amaruda, it could be other things as well that cause it. But yeah, sometimes you might have the soul, sometimes you won't. It's sort of a situational thing. I don't know if it's entirely really a deck building thing. I mean, you could build your deck to be a bit more reliable with Apple Witch Cider, but I actually do feel like a lot of it as well comes down to just the situation really, and how turns have played out in terms of determining whether or not this will have the massive boon increase in defense. And it's sort of a discard one as well, so it's a bit like a PG. So you kind of have to just think of that and be a bit mindful, because obviously depending on what you discard, you could, like if you're trying to, for example, for your Himiko, you're going to be putting in a trigger, and if you're putting in a trigger, then well, that means you probably dropped a 15k shield, or maybe even a sentinel draw. So in those situations, well, hopefully you don't have to do that. Hopefully you'll just be normal soul charging additional triggers. But obviously with Himiko reverse putting locked triggers out there, you might have to have like 2 locked triggers after already having used Himiko to then the base Himiko in the previous turn to maybe have put another trigger as well. So you may have needed at least 3 triggers at that point. So it can be one of those things where some situations maybe you'll be forced to have to guard with those, in which case you're not really building shield value. Like you're not playing broken defense if you're doing that, probably, because in a way you've offsetted it by just trying to meet Himiko's conditions, which in itself means that you had to kind of compromise your defense a bit. But otherwise, that aside, you do have the potential just to get rid of some janky 5k shield or something, and just get defense from there. Be careful you go against any battledore skills like Morfessa, because obviously if you go against Morfessa, you still have to put 2 guidance circle. So like just like when you perfect guard, you have to drop 3 cards total because this card doesn't really count towards the condition. It's the same with this as well. So if you're trying to use this to gain shield, just know that you're going to end up having to drop 3 cards. And speaking of which, Star Vader reveals from yesterday, they've got a grade 2 which has a battledore skill, and they could potentially call out 2. So I don't know if people are actually going to play that, because I've seen a lot of disappointment around Star Vaders. But the grade 2s, they might have something going for them in terms of pressure and things. So that's something to maybe just have an eye on. The next thing I want to take a look at is Himiko reverse. So this kind of came out more or less, I think, as I expected. I'm pretty sure, I bet a lot of people probably thought the same thing about this. So like at the end of your turn, if you have a Vanguard with Himiko's name, and you've activated triggers twice or more, so obviously Himiko, a lot of times you do end up activating the trigger effect twice for her skill. But you may find situations where your opponent's grade stuck in grade 1, so maybe you can only do the trigger once. But so that means then you can actually do the drive checks and include those towards a condition as well to still get off reverse skill. So that's still a thing. And then what you need to do is you need to have 1 rear guard at least, and then just shoves in everything to soul. Like there's no like choosing. You have to put everything in, and then you write as rest. And that's kind of important, that wording, because I think the reason why they word it that way, like if you have 1 or more rear guards in the first place, is because they don't want you to spam multiple copies of this card. Obviously, every time you spam, you are actually negging your hand, because it's not Axel 2, it's not Protect 1, so you can't really get a hand replenishing off of it. But still, it does seem like they were trying to make it so you can't use reverse multiple times with that. So you're shoving everything to your soul each time you do that. So then when you check for the second reverse, you're going to find there's nothing on the field, so you can't do the second reverse. That seems to be the idea anyway. Unless they maybe one day make a card that can call at the end of your turn, then that could change things, like a Kamar, but for the end phase, or rather for the end of your turn, because that I think affects the timing a bit. Then the second skill, Vanguard skill, once per turn, when this unit attacks or is attacked, Counterblast 1, draw a card. Choose a critical or draw trigger from your sword and put it into your rear guard as a locked card, and if you do, you activate the trigger effects for every locked card you have. So you can use it defensively. Obviously, like once you ride this reverse from your hand, ideally you would be doing the normal Himiko, and then you'd follow up with this during your opponent's turn. You'd use it to get the extra 10k power. Ideally a draw as well, if you've got the draw trigger. So you plus off that, and then when you go to your next turn, you could then do reverse again. You now have 2 locked units, and obviously you have to be a bit conscious about your board setup. So if you're playing a CEO build, CEO might not be as ideal in some cases, depending, like especially 2 CEOs, because you need Norn as the booster. So you just go kind of be aware of that. So maybe just 1 CEO column might be fine if you're playing with 2 locked boosters, 1 behind Vanguard, 1 behind the other rear, and then the other rear could be like Repler or something. Let's just say. But then that being said, Repler is a Counterblast 1. This card, Himiko reverse, if you're playing into that whole 2 locked unit thing, you're going to use 2 Counterblasts. So, and CEO, obviously, a lot of the time you're going to use 1 CB to get the quick gauge. So, be very, very careful about Counterblast. Like this card, people are hyping this thing up, but the Counterblast thing actually scares me. Like really scares me. Especially because some of the Himiko support does require Counterblast, while Himiko herself was free. This reverse thing does drain your Counterblast if you're actually using it for the spicy plays that that are getting people excited right now. I think ideally it's going to create a situation where you kind of want to wish you could ride back into normal Himiko, but there is actually something else as well to bring up, which I'll get to in a bit. But other than that, it's pretty decent. It's a nice spicy card. It's not crazy. Don't get me wrong. Like I don't think it's actually as hyped up as people are online trying to hype it up to be. It looks like, I think on service it looks crazy, But honestly, as like someone that's a bit more familiar with the Genesis cards, it doesn't look as nuts from my perspective. I think something that's important to note though is Link Joker. They can play these reverse cards, but I think you have to be a bit careful. There are some rules around how you apply triggers in mixed clans, so that's something to just look into. I can't remember it all properly, so I don't want to quote anything in this video, because obviously I don't remember the rules myself because I don't do clan mixing, and hardly anyone does. It's kind of something that's just been lost in the ages, I think, in a lot of people's minds. But if you do plan to do Link Joker with Himiko, just look into that first. Like, make sure you're careful on the clan mixing rules. Obviously, no one really made decks where reverse units were the bosses in Link Joker, because back then we had Lord printed on those, so there wasn't really a real reason to ride them. Obviously now with this new set and the lack of Lords in these reverse units, it's a whole different story. The next thing is Yatagarusu. So this kind of surprised me because I expected like a rearguard skill, and I really wanted a rearguard skill because with the Taro ban, the main multi-attacking has been Regalia, CEO Yggdrasil, and obviously everyone knows, it's no surprise really, that a lot of the clan has become the Regalia clan, and it's a real shame because I do want to see more diversity. We had the diversity, it was actually literally there. Obviously there's the whole Fenrir tier 0 thing, whatever, but before that, like underneath that, there were like a lot of solid Genesis decks to choose from, and it was just like, it's such a great state. Like you could really like, I think it's something that a lot of clan fans, it's all like the ideal dream to have. Whereas on the other hand, the other clan that I main, OTT, right now has a lot of viable builds right now. So I think it feels like the OTT side is enjoying things a lot more. So this whole Vanguard skill thing, it's not a bad card at all though. Like, it's disappointing it's not rearguard to complement other boss cards like Fenrir or Himiko or Fortuna, etc, etc. But it's kind of it's actually a very good card on its own as a boss card. Like, it's very strong. If we just go through this skill, so if you're just looking for something strong, you're kind of a winner. But if you're looking for some flavor to your decks, it's a bit more debatable. When this unit attacks, cost can plus 1 and Soul Blast 3. So again, yikes, can plus 1. But that might give you something to think about, because CEO Yggdrasil is can plus 1 a lot of times if you're not using Thread to gain gauge. So you might have to actually reevaluate how. And I obviously have to test this as well. Like, I'm only just reviewing cards I read like hours ago. So, but yes, it has been on my mind to rethink in V Premium at least, playing CEO Yggdrasil, maybe even Premium as well. I am actually rethinking CEO Yggdrasil now because of this card. But basically, when it attacks, can blast 1 and Soul Blast 3, and perform all of the following according to the sum of the grades of the Soul Blaster's cost. So basically, you only get to Soul Blast exactly 3 cards. So you're going to try and max those grades to be at least 9, because 9 is the maximum to get the full effect. So if you get a sum of 5 or more, your front row gains 10k, which is very nice. It sort of just makes it feel like you've now met the base condition, because a lot of Genesis bosses kind of do something on that sort of power level. The next bit is 7 or more. Stand 2 of your rear guards. Very, very strong, and that's obviously what makes all the difference, because multi-attacking is great, and it's how you get past Protect clans and Shiranui, who can get 2 protects in 1 turn, or Bad Bounty and Premium, who can ride itself and get another Protect, and you know, the whole thing really. And then you've got 9 or more, which is draw 2 cards, which just helps because you can basically build more hands, so you can play a long game with your opponent. But if you're using it as a finisher, that bit is probably not as important. Then you've got the next skill. So that first skill is really strong. It's actually kind of similar to the original Yatagarusu. I think it was sort of meant to be based on the original. But then Yeah, another thing as well is that back then no one really played Yatagarusu because Minerva came out in the same set, so it got overshadowed quite easily. But it was actually quite a decent card if you read the skill of the original Yatagarusu. It was a Soul Blast 9 though, from what I recall. Now the second skill, when your unit is placed on Guardian Circle, you can Soul Blast 3 and it gets an extra 10k shield until the end of the battle. So that's kind of helpful because obviously it gives you more ways to defend. You can also use it with Intercept because it says put on Guardian Circle. So if you've got a grade 2, you can just shove it in there, have a 15k shield at least, which is very handy. Might be actually handy against Morfessa, by the way. I know it feels like we're just going back to Morfessa here, but obviously playing around Battledore is something to think about. Battledore, when I say that, by the way, I'm referring to cards that require you to guard with 2 or more cards from hand. Because if you G-guard, right, sometimes when you G-guard, you actually can't get enough shield to guard against Morfessa, especially if they're playing the Force Marker version of Luard. Because the Force Marker version, they can create power levels that go far beyond 30k to guard with your G-Guardians. So if you're able to give like shield to Intercept, that might actually make the difference for you to not have to require second G-Guard for that attack. So that could be handy. Yeah, it's pretty handy, like in general, like having access to that. Obviously, like the whole Soul Blast 3 thing, you won't always be able to tell if you have the skill, the condition for that skill. But then again, Yatagarusu's own battling skill is a Soul Blast 3 anyway to begin with, so there's a lot of soul conservation if you're playing a turn that relies on Yatagarusu, which is nice actually. So you might find more opportunities to make use of it, I think, anyway, so pretty good. Also, just remember Valkyrian is playable in every deck, so obviously Genesis included, because that's the one that it's been promoted with. So whenever you're playing cards that, just like with Gate Chronicle and their binding to create some upgrades and things with Valkyrian, this card is also a sum-based card, so Valkyrian's useful as a cost if you want to try and have like a grade 5 or something to make paying the cost easier. So you have grade 5, grade 2, boom, 9 grades done. Obviously, again, experiment, playtest. This stuff requires a lot of playtesting. The Genesis right now is in a very complicated state. Like all these cards have been printing recently, even Orange Witch Valencia, which looks crazy, but obviously you know the condition is going to be like main phase Soul Blasting to actually be able to trigger it. And obviously Kamar is another card that's like if you Soul Blast 3 or more during your main phase, you can do this and that. So there's a lot of like fiddling around with the main deck, or like it's a weird one. Like you have to actually really kind of experience and see like how often things are usable, and with what cards, and how you're going to tweak your main deck around, because your boss maybe doesn't do something as often, or maybe because you're not using that boss as often. It gets a bit convoluted. So there's definitely a lot of scope of testing with this. Like it's not an easy deck to master and solve. I'm going to say that right now. It's definitely going to be tailored around your own personal experience with testing and what sort of direction you take your deck towards. So yeah, don't walk away from these reveals and think to yourself, I've got it all figured out now. You may actually find situations where you're just like, yeah, this isn't gonna work. I think I'm gonna have to change a whole bunch of things here and there. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Yatagarusu obviously surprised me, but the other two I think kind of came out roughly as expected. By the way, Yatagarusu is officially another card that can Soul Blast during your opponent's turn, but I don't know if there's actually anything to Soul Blast, because obviously Fenrir has the interaction of Vanguard plays and go on with Melissa, and then you've also got like Regalia with Ackley's and the old school norm giving 5k to Vanguard if you have a Regalia Vanguard. So I'm not sure like what interactions to look forward to, but yeah, it's just something to note really, that you've now got a third card besides Secret Elsie and Veratrum that can Soul Blast during your opponent's turn. It's just not a Guardian unit, it's a Vanguard skill, and that is kind of like restrictive in a sense, because the Vanguards kind of do matter for some of these defensive interactions you do during your opponent's turn. I know we've got Himiko as well, who can do defensive plays during your opponent's turn, and we're just getting more of it. We've got Fortuna last set as well. Fortuna can also technically build up defensive plays as well during your opponent's turn. It's kind of interesting, but at the end of the day, you need to be able to get your opponent 6 damage, so always remember that. Like, if you're building Genesis, it's got to be about, can I get my opponent to 6 damage? Can I overcome like these crazy hand traps, Grand Blue's insane defense, etc, etc. Like Regalia is very easy to mess with, but obviously if you're playing non-Regalia, then there's a lot to think about. It's going to be a lot of work. Anyway, hope you enjoyed that, and looking forward to, I guess, the OTT reveals. I'll probably be talking about that one as well. Until then, goodbye.